I recently bought the starter deck Chaos Incarnate for 25 bucks, and upon opening my Goad-centric commander deck, there was a total of 1 card with Goad. Not joking. Upon further research, all the singles in this deck are worth around $30 to $50 depending on which of the starter decks you buy, so let's just say around 40 bucks. To buy one of these starter decks, it ranges from $20 to $35, so the value is somewhat there. But we'll just meet in the middle at $25. My 3 main issues with starter commander decks in their current form are: 1. The decks assume the player can both play the game, but also acts like the player has never played the game before, including basic, easy-to-understand cards that don't really work well with the deck strategy, when in reality these decks are starter decks, meaning people know how to play the game, and they're ready to start. They should be built for players who understand the basics and need sold on the format in an affordable way. If you want to teach someone the game, there are free teaching decks that pretty much every LGS has. 2. They are packed with newer cards. These decks should be a chance to show newer players some of the older stuff, some of the newer stuff, different play styles, not just packed with cards from the last 3 years. Older cards supply value that new cards just don't. And 3, they avoid any strategy that is viewed as unfun or challenging. No stacks, no mill, no combo, no group hug, no reanimator, just very easy to grasp concepts like tribal, aggro, good stuff, which I get, but when people are first starting to play is when they decide if this game will be a game they continue to play, and the best way to get them to do that is by showing them cool plays, cool interactions, and cool play styles. These decks should be made to teach new players new strategies to sell people on the format for an affordable price, not teach them the game. In the spirit of making a more cohesive, fun deck for new players, and challenging myself along with them, I wanted to take a figurative $25 budget that you would spend on one of these precons and make my own precon that you can go buy for $25. Let's get into it. My starter deck is called Lone Wolf, and its commander is Sarulf Realm Eater. 1, a black and a green for a 3/3 wolf. Whenever a permanent an opponent controls is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, put a 1/1 counter on Sarulf. At the beginning of your upkeep, if Sarulf has 1 or more +1/+1 counters on them, you may remove all of them. If you do, exile all other non-land permanents with mana value less than or equal to the amount of counters removed. This deck is based around protecting Sarulf until we need to wipe the board, keeping a clean board for us to feel free to smack face with our wolf, along with a ton of combat tricks and sneaky interactions to keep our creatures around. This deck has a straightforward game plan while introducing the player to new strategies and ways of building a deck, while showing them older and more unique card picks. Let's get into it. Putting +1/+1 counters on Sarulf not only makes his board wipe more powerful, but it also just makes him a huge threat by proxy. Being able to control the amount of counters on Sarulf can take out everything in play super quickly. Adaptive Spore Slinger is a great way to buff Sarulf with a +2/+2 vigilance, but it's mainly going to be used for its proliferate to put more 1/1 counters on Sarulf while being a body. Winding Constrictor is insanely powerful for the price, putting an additional 1/1 counter on anything we put a 1/1 counter on. And for a black and a green, and at this value, for sure. Forgotten Ancient is a classic, turning all the spells the opponents play into 1/1 counters on Ancient that we can then move to Sarulf. Or just keep Forgotten Ancient as a second threat, always good. Kami of Whispered Hope is just another Winding Constrictor with the added bonus of being able to tap for mana. Visions of Dominance will put a 1/1 counter on Sarulf and then double them, along with Flashback. This does the job. Corpsejack Menace is a third Winding Constrictor. Honestly, the fact that we can run 3 of these at this price is so amazing. And finally, Roaring Earth is one that I've been looking for a deck to put it in, and this is perfect. All of our lands turn into another 1/1 counter on Sarulf, or we can just channel it and turn one of our lands into a creature. Speaking of which, let's talk about that. You may have noticed Sarulf's board wipe says non-land permanents, so if we can animate some lands, they won't get wiped, and then we can bash face with them. First off, man lands themselves are great in here. Dread Sanctuary, Mishra's Factory, Crawling Barrens, and Hissing Quagmire can all animate themselves after Sarulf's board wipe for a good chunk of damage, while also just being lands in the early game. Utilizing the Awaken mechanic is also pretty decent in this deck, as they can just be used for their non-awakened versions of the card. Like Earthen Arms just puts 2 1/1 counters on our creature for 2, which is great in here, but if we cast it for 6 and a green, it does the same thing and then turns one of our lands into a 4/4. Rising Miasma and Ruinous Path are removal that we can also awaken. Finally, we've got Awakening of the Vitu-Ghazi, Waker of the Wilds, and Root Awakening. Maybe you can see a theme in all these names. All these cards will straight up animate lands, whether that be all of them in the form of Root Awakening or making one big bad land in the form of Awakening of Vitu-Ghazi. Either way pairs great with Sarulf's board wipe. Sarulf's ability is threatening and easy to see coming from a mile away, so we're going to need some ways to protect him from removal. Armor of Shadows, Blossoming Defense, Oblivion's Hunger, Ranger's Guile, Snakeskin Veil, and Without Weakness are all cheap combat tricks that will protect Sarulf from either board wipes or removal with either Hexproof or Indestructible, so that we're able to get our board wipe off, while cards like Slippery Bogbinder give permanent Hexproof until we're ready. A quick add-on here, this deck does have a bit of a fog sub-theme as more of a contingency plan. If we need more time to set up our commander and lands, we've got 9 fog effects just to hold them back until we can finally set up our play. Blood Tracker is a 2/2 flyer that allows us to pay 2 life to put a 1/1 counter on him, and when he leaves the battlefield, not dies, we draw cards for each 1/1 counter on him. Paired with our 1/1 counter interactions and theme in the deck, and the fact Blood Tracker has to leave the battlefield, not die, makes this one of the strongest cards in the deck, definitely. Oubliette is an interesting one in that it's really good just to remove opponents' creatures and commanders, but it also doubles as a way to protect something on our side. We could Oubliette something that's on our side, wait till next turn to trigger Sarulf's board wipe the Oubliette, and get our creature back. It's kind of cool. Erratic Portal is similar. If opponents are tapped out, you may be able to use it to get like a cheeky bounce here and there, but in reality, we'll be using it to bounce our own creatures before Sarulf's board wipe activates to protect some of our bigger bombs. And finally, my favorite card in this deck easily, Portcullis. Yeah, 4 colorless for an artifact. Whenever any creature comes into play, if there are 2 or more other creatures in play, exile that creature until Portcullis leaves play. This one's just funny, honestly. If you can get your commander on turn 2 with an Elvish Mystic, then turn 3 this, at that point no one can play anything or it just gets exiled. Opponents can either play creatures anyway and let them get exiled, they still get their ETBs if they have one, and hope to get rid of Portcullis to have them re-enter. If they choose to do that, we can just exile all their creatures with Sarulf anyway. Or they can straight up destroy Portcullis, and if they do that, whatever, we got a 1-for-1. If they can't do either of those though, they have to just get smacked in the face over and over again with our wolf, and paired with our animated lands, Portcullis gets even better. On top of that, we've got 8 ramp, 10 removal, 9 card draw, and 5 board wipes, which include Sarulf, which you can see on your screen right here, along with 38 lands. I think this deck teaches newer players a few important lessons, the first of which being feeling like you're losing isn't losing. This deck is very tempo-oriented and has a lot of setup and payoff. Early game will feel slow and mucky. It won't feel like you're doing a lot until you protect Sarulf into a board exile. That's where the tempo shift happens, and that's important for new players to learn that like your decks aren't going to be strong right off the bat. You have to wait for when your deck excels. Number 2, how to play at instant speed and conserve mana. With all the fog effects and combat tricks in this deck, players will have to think of how much mana to keep open for opponent's turn and how to play at instant speed, which are both really useful. And finally, this deck teaches players to look for commander/deck specific cards when building their own decks. Portcullis is essentially a useless card, but in this deck it's pretty sweet. Blood Tracker and Erratic Portal are super good in this. They're good in a bunch of decks, but they're very niche cards, but take on a whole new playstyle when viewed through the lens of this deck. If you want to buy this whole deck, lands and all, right now, it would be, can we get a drum roll? $24.46 at your local card shop, which is wild. Such good value on these cards and a unique play style and strategy that you can go buy the entire thing for the same price you'd buy a starter deck, which is pretty sweet. Let me know if you'd like to see how this deck stands up against another starter deck. Be sure to check out the channel. Much love, and go play some Magic.